It wasn't the grandeur of the cathedral that silenced the crowd that day. It wasn't the ceremonial procession or the familiar rhythms of ancient songs echoing against the marble walls. No, it was something else entirely, something invisible, something electric, something that made the air itself feel heavier, as if the world were holding its breath. Pope Francis, already frail and hunched with the weight of his years and secrets, stepped into the light for what would become his final public appearance. There was an uneasiness among those gathered, an instinctive knowing, deep in the gut, that this moment was not like the others. Some whispered about his health, others speculated about politics, scandals, conspiracy, but no one was prepared for what was about to be said. The Pope's voice, once vibrant, now quivered like a flame in the wind. Yet, it carried a gravity that pinned every heart to the floor. He spoke in fragments, half prayers, half warnings, weaving a tapestry of meaning so dense and cryptic that most could not follow. Yet those who listened with the ears of the Spirit, those who knew how to hear beyond words, understood that something ancient was being unveiled. He spoke of a wind, a dark wind, a vento nero. It would rise quietly, unnoticed at first, brushing against the edges of life like a shadow one glimpses from the corner of the eye. It would sweep across cities, churches, families, not a wind that bends trees or shatters windows, but a spiritual current, cold and suffocating, draining the warmth of faith from the souls it touched. Pope Francis did not describe disasters of fire or blood. He did not predict wars of armies or weapons. His warning was far more terrifying. He foresaw a war of the unseen, a slow, silent corrosion of the very core of what makes humanity human, the erosion of trust, the mocking of hope, the abandonment of truth. He paused often during his message, as if struggling to find words large enough to contain the weight of his visions. At times, it seemed as if he were speaking not just to those before him, but to generations who would come after, to those who would be standing in the ashes of everything once called sacred, trying to remember where it all went wrong. The crowd listened politely, respectfully. Some nodded, pretending to understand. Others frowned, confused, unsettled. But only a few, a small remnant scattered among the thousand, truly felt the chill of recognition run down their spine. Only a few knew that they were hearing the final alarm before the gates closed forever. When he finished speaking, there was no applause, only a heavy, bewildered silence. And then, as if the moment itself could not bear to linger, Pope Francis turned and disappeared into the shadows of the sanctuary, leaving behind a question so vast, so terrifying, that few dared to even acknowledge it. Was the world already standing in the path of the dark wind he had spoken of? In the days that followed, Vatican spokesmen tried to minimize the event. They called it poetic, symbolic, a reflection on the challenges of modern life. They released carefully edited transcripts that softened the words, smoothed the edges, made the Pope's warning seem distant and abstract. But the ones who had felt it, truly felt it, knew better. They knew that a storm does not begin with the first raindrop, nor does an avalanche begin with the first falling stone. They knew that when the spirit trembles without reason, when the soul feels a grief it cannot name, something has already shifted in the unseen realms. There were rumors, too, whispers among the inner circles of the Vatican. Some claimed that the Pope had been advised not to speak so openly. Others said he had insisted, knowing he would not have another chance. Still others believed that the message was even deeper than it appeared, that within his words there were hidden instructions, veiled truths, meant only for those with eyes to see. Among these whispers was talk of a symbol. The Vento Nero would not be an isolated event, but a sign of deeper spiritual currents moving across the earth, a reshaping of the world's spiritual foundation, a sifting of souls. And if the Pope's prophecy was true, then the first tendrils of that black wind were already touching the edges of our lives, chilling our prayers, hollowing our conviction, numbing our ability to love, to believe, to hope. If you are honest with yourself, you may have already felt it. Have you noticed how fear has become the background noise of daily life? How division has infected even the closest relationships? How despair seems to bloom faster than joy? Have you sensed the growing weariness in people's eyes? The hunger for something they cannot name but desperately crave? These are not random coincidences. They are the first whispers of the wind. And now, as the signs grow stronger, the urgency of Pope Francis's warning becomes almost unbearable, because what he revealed that day, what few truly understood, was not just a prediction. It was a choice, a crossroads, a final chance for those willing to awaken before the darkness spreads beyond all recovery. In the next breath, we will dive deeper into the meaning of this black wind, into the hidden layers of prophecy that Pope Francis dared to speak only once, and why the true battle for the soul of the world is about to begin. The question is no longer whether the wind is coming. It is whether you will recognize it before it's too late. The black wind that Pope Francis spoke of was never meant to be understood literally. It was a metaphor, a veil lifted for only a moment to reveal a truth so unsettling that most hearts would instinctively look away. It was not a wind that would shake trees or tear roofs from houses. It was subtler, crueler, a spiritual current designed to erode the very core of human resistance from the inside out. Francis warned that this wind would not announce itself with grand disasters. It would seep into life like a poison, invisible but fatal. It would turn strength into apathy, clarity into confusion, love into suspicion. It would not destroy by force. It would destroy by invitation, by seduction, by whispering to the soul that surrender is easier than endurance. Those attuned to the spiritual currents of the world might have recognized the early breezes already. A certain numbness in the face of tragedy, a deepening distrust, not just of institutions, but of each other, a weariness that no amount of sleep could cure, a gnawing sense that life, somehow, was becoming thinner, weaker, more fragile. These are the fingerprints of the black wind, present but unseen. In his private writings, now quietly circulating among a few courageous scholars, Pope Francis described the black wind as a form of spiritual starvation. It would not take away food or water or shelter. It would take away meaning. It would strip the sacred from the ordinary. It would whisper that prayer is pointless, that hope is foolish, that love is dangerous. And it would do all this with such gentleness that few would even resist. He described how, under the influence of this force, faith would not be violently rejected. It would simply be forgotten. Forgotten like a childhood song, a language once spoken but now abandoned. Forgotten not because it was hated, but because it was no longer seen as necessary. Imagine standing in a room where the oxygen is slowly being removed. You don't panic at first. You simply feel a little tired, a little unfocused, then heavier, then slower. And by the time you realize you are suffocating, it is too late to escape. This, Francis said, is how the black wind would move. The first targets would be the vulnerable, the young, the lonely, the lost. But soon, it would creep into every layer of society. Artists would lose the fire of true inspiration, replaced by empty spectacle. Leaders would lose the vision to guide, replaced by hollow ambition. Families would lose the will to endure, replaced by isolation disguised as independence. The black wind would twist even the most sacred instincts. Mercy would become weakness. Justice would become revenge. Compassion would become manipulation. And the soul, left defenseless against such distortions, would slowly fold in on itself, growing smaller and colder with each passing day. Francis warned that one of the deadliest symptoms of this spiritual collapse would be a false sense of peace. As the black wind gained strength, many would feel relieved. The struggles of conscience would fade. The uncomfortable demands of faith would vanish. People would mistake this numbness for freedom. They would celebrate their chains, believing they had been liberated. He wrote that the world would become louder and louder, more frantic, more obsessed with itself, precisely to drown out the growing silence within. That entertainment would become more extreme, that ideologies would become more violent, that distractions would become more desperate, all to avoid facing the terrifying truth that something essential was dying inside them. Those few who still held on to the old fire, the quiet flame of true faith, would feel increasingly alienated. They would look around and see smiling faces, thriving businesses, colorful celebrations, but they would sense the emptiness beneath it all. They would know that the soul of the world was hollowing out, becoming a shell, a mask. Francis begged those who could still hear to resist, to fight not with anger or with violence, but with stubborn joy, with quiet truth, with relentless hope. He believed that even as the black wind gained strength, it could not extinguish a heart that remained firmly rooted in the eternal. He pointed to simple things as anchors against the coming storm: an unbroken family meal, a whispered prayer at dawn, an act of kindness done in secret, a candle lit against the darkness. He believed that small acts of true faith would create fractures in the black wind's advance, places where light could still enter. But he also knew it would not be easy. The black wind would come disguised as necessity. It would offer comfort, security, belonging. It would exploit every wound, every fear, every exhaustion. It would make resistance seem foolish, lonely, dangerous, and many, even many who once stood strong, would fall. Francis wrote, "The greatest battles are not fought with swords or armies, but within the soul, and the soul's battlefield is silence. In the silence, you will hear one voice calling you home and 1,000 voices calling you to forget. Already, you may feel this battle within yourself. Already, you may have felt the black wind's chill, the temptation to give up, to give in, to fall asleep spiritually, and let the world carry you wherever it wants. But you are here, you are listening, and that means there is still a spark alive within you." Because the next signs Pope Francis warned about, the signs that would prove the black wind is not coming, but has already begun to rule, are beginning to unfold all around us. And in the next breath, you will see them with a clarity that may haunt you. The question is, will you have the courage to keep your eyes open, or will you choose, like so many others, the peace of forgetting? The first signs arrived like whispers in a crowded room, easy to ignore, even easier to forget. They didn't come with fire or blood or shattered skies. They came with sighs, with empty stares, with the quiet crumbling of things once taken for granted. They came softly enough that even now, many refuse to believe they are real. It began with the slow death of conversation. You could see it in coffee shops, in living rooms, even in churches. Words, once vehicles of meaning, began to lose their weight. Dialogue became performance. Arguments replaced genuine listening. People spoke to dominate, not to understand. The sacred rhythm of true communication, where one heart reaches out to another across the bridge of vulnerability, began to wither. Then came the hollowing of community. Communities that once thrived on shared purpose, on mutual sacrifice and celebration, began to rot from within. Relationships, once bound by loyalty and love, dissolved into transaction. Families fractured over petty differences. Friendships eroded under the weight of suspicion and self-interest. Neighborhoods became collections of strangers living side by side, each locked inside their own tiny world. The third sign was more subtle, but more deadly. It was the erosion of awe. The human heart, once so naturally drawn to the sacred, a sunrise, a newborn child, a whispered prayer in a darkened room, began to harden. Beauty no longer moved people. Miracles no longer inspired wonder. The everyday gifts that once called forth gratitude now barely registered. It was not that beauty disappeared. It was that people lost the eyes to see it. These signs were not random. They were the early gusts of the black wind, testing the foundations, probing for weaknesses, whispering to the soul that there was nothing left worth fighting for. Francis had warned that when the black wind began to blow, it would target the invisible first, the bonds that hold families, friendships, communities, and faiths together. And now, if you are honest, you can see it everywhere. Consider the rise of despair. Never before in human history have so many lived in material comfort while simultaneously drowning in depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. Never before have we been so connected digitally, yet so isolated spiritually. Never before has it been so easy to find entertainment, yet so difficult to find peace. This was no accident. It was by design. Because despair is the fertile soil where the black wind plants its seeds. Despair breeds cynicism, and cynicism blinds the soul to truth. It convinces the heart that goodness is naive, that love is weakness, that hope is foolish. And once that lie is accepted, the collapse is inevitable. You can feel it in the way people move now. Rushed, impatient, numb. You can hear it in the way they speak. Shallow, defensive, hungry for approval, but terrified of intimacy. You can see it in their eyes, the way they glaze over, flicker with suspicion, dart away from anything that might require true vulnerability. Another sign, one that few notice but many feel, is the growing restlessness in our very bodies. Pope Francis wrote that the black wind would not just touch the spirit, but would bleed into the flesh. He predicted rising waves of illnesses with no clear cause, exhaustion without physical explanation, a general sense of malaise that no medicine could cure. It would be a spiritual sickness disguised as a physical one, and modern science, brilliant but blind to the unseen, would be powerless to heal it. And indeed, we are witnessing it, a world richer, safer, and more advanced than ever before, yet filled with people who feel sick, tired, disconnected, and afraid. A generation blessed with opportunities their ancestors could scarcely dream of, yet riddled with addictions, anxieties, and a deep, paralyzing sense of meaninglessness. These are not isolated problems. They are symptoms of a deeper disease, the disease of forgetting who we are, what we are made for, and who has called us by name. Francis warned that the black wind would accelerate until what was once unthinkable became normal. And already we see it. Celebrations of violence, glorifications of selfishness, the elevation of vanity to virtue. It is happening. It is here. And still, most sleepwalk through the storm, lulled by comfort, distracted by noise. But not you, because you are here. You have heard the trembling in the voice of the world. You have felt the emptiness growing behind the glittering surface of modern life. You know, deep in your bones, that something essential is slipping away, and you have a choice. You can close your eyes, cover your ears, and surrender to the numbness that so many now call normal. Or you can stay awake. You can resist. You can hold the line, even when the world laughs at you, mocks you, forgets you. Because the next movement of the black wind will not be silent. Pope Francis foresaw what would happen when humanity's defenses were down, when the spirit was weakened, when the soul was almost too tired to fight. What comes next is no longer just about signs. It is about survival. The next step in the collapse is already unfolding, and it will demand more courage than most realize. Are you ready to face what is coming? Because the next breath you take may be into a world that no longer remembers how to breathe light. It's easy to ask, standing in the ruins, why no one sounded the alarm earlier? Why the world, so proud of its knowledge, so drunk on its technology, could not see the collapse coming? But the truth is more painful and far more terrifying. The warning was sounded, loud enough for anyone who had ears to hear. Most simply chose not to. It wasn't because they were evil. It wasn't because they were foolish. It was because the black wind had prepared them for this moment, long before it arrived. Slowly, over decades, it had dulled the senses. It had softened the will. It had trained humanity to choose comfort over truth, ease over effort, distraction over devotion. By the time Pope Francis spoke of the black wind, most hearts had already been conditioned not to hear him. The black wind worked not through fear, but through sedation. It lulled people into a dream where they were always entertained, always validated, always the center of their own tiny universe. It whispered that questioning was too exhausting, that searching was too risky, that staying comfortable was the only thing that mattered. And so, when the warning finally came, it sounded strange. It sounded uncomfortable. It demanded something: awareness, vigilance, sacrifice that most were no longer willing or even able to give. Instead, they laughed, or they rationalized, or they turned the volume up higher to drown out the unsettling voice inside. Francis had foreseen this reaction. He wrote that humanity would not reject the truth because it was untrue, but because it was inconvenient. It demanded change, and change demands pain. And in a world addicted to ease, pain has become the unforgivable sin. The distraction was brilliant in its simplicity. While the soul starved, the body was flooded with stimulation, endless entertainment, endless outrage, endless noise. Every waking moment filled with something to watch, to click, to scroll. A constant hum of meaningless urgency that left no room for real thought, real silence, real encounter. And where distraction failed, division triumphed. Francis warned that the black wind would turn hearts not just away from God, but against each other, that families would become battlegrounds, that friends would become strangers, that communities would be ripped apart by arguments so petty, so meaningless, that in any other era they would have been laughed off, but now they would be treated as wars to the death, because division weakens, and weakness invites surrender. Those who could have stood together, resisted together, prayed together, now turned on each other, each blaming the other for the growing emptiness they all secretly felt, but could not name. And the black wind grew stronger. Those few who tried to warn others were mocked, labeled as extremists, alarmists, relics clinging to a dead world. Their calls to awaken were drowned out by a chorus of comfortable laughter. By now, the tragedy is almost unbearable. The people who needed the warning most were the least capable of hearing it. It was not ignorance, it was a learned deafness, a blindness taught generation by generation, breath by breath, choice by choice. Even now, as the signs become undeniable, as the emptiness deepens and the despair thickens, most still cling to the illusion. They tell themselves that things are normal, that things will get better, that the hollow ache inside can be cured with one more purchase, one more distraction, one more performance of happiness. They cannot admit that they are drowning, because if they did, they would have to reach for something real, something painful, something sacred. And reaching for the sacred requires humility. It requires facing the terrifying truth that they cannot save themselves. This is why the warning was ignored, because it was easier to sleep, easier to numb, easier to smile and pretend than to weep and change. Pope Francis, in the final fragments of his private writings, described a vision that breaks the heart: a great city, beautiful and shining on the outside, but hollow and crumbling within. Its people danced and sang and congratulated themselves on their greatness, even as the cracks in the foundation spread and the ground began to buckle beneath their feet. They celebrated until the very last moment, until the collapse swallowed them whole. He called it the Festival of Forgetting, and we are living in it now. But not everyone has to be lost. Even now, even in the growing storm, there remains a narrow path for those who will awaken, for those who will endure the pain of seeing clearly, for those who will resist the temptation to forget. Because the black wind, as terrible as it is, cannot destroy the soul that clings to truth. It can batter it, it can isolate it, it can starve it, but it cannot break it, unless we let it. And Pope Francis left more than warning. He left a map, a way to recognize the black wind, a way to resist it, and a way to prepare for the battle that is now rushing toward us faster than most can imagine. In the next breath, we will uncover the secret signs he left behind, signs that can still lead the awake to safety, to strength, and to the hidden wellsprings of light that the darkness cannot touch. If you have the courage to see them, if you have the will to walk the narrow road, because what comes next is not for the faint of heart. and every moment from now will test whether your soul was truly awake or just pretending. There is a reason you are still listening, a reason your heart has not yet hardened, your soul not yet surrendered to the black wind's seduction. Deep inside you, there is something ancient, something that has refused to die even when the world begged you to forget. And now, as the storm strengthens and the air grows thinner, Pope Francis's final warnings come to life, like embers stirring in the ashes. He did not leave us powerless. He left signs, weapons forged not of iron, but of spirit, keys hidden in plain sight, for those willing to see. The first and most essential is this: guard the silence. In a world drowning in noise, silence has become a battlefield. Francis wrote that in the silence, you can hear the whispers of the divine, but you can also hear the hiss of the black wind. Silence reveals. Silence unmasks. Silence strips away the illusions we wrap ourselves in. And so the world has made silence almost impossible to find. But those who can reclaim it, even for a few minutes a day, will begin to feel their spiritual senses sharpening. They will begin to see through the deceptions that so easily trap others. They will hear the true voice calling them home, not the thousand false voices screaming for their attention. Find your silence. Protect it, even if it means retreating from the noise that everyone else seems to crave. The second sign is much harder. Embrace the discomfort. Francis wrote with brutal honesty that resistance would hurt. It would cost. It would make you a stranger in your own land, a wanderer among your own people. Because the black wind thrives on comfort, it grows fat on ease, and those who worship their own security will never have the strength to withstand it. You will be called foolish. You will be misunderstood. You will be tempted to abandon the narrow path for the wide, easy road, where the laughter is loud and the approval comes cheap. But do not be fooled. The wide road leads only to emptiness. True strength is forged in the fire of discomfort. It is born when you kneel even when no one is watching, when you pray even when your own heart feels cold, when you love even when the world tells you to hate. The third weapon is memory. Francis wrote that memory would become a revolutionary act. In a world obsessed with novelty, with trends, with endless reinvention, remembering the ancient truths would be an act of defiance. Remember the stories, remember the promises, remember the words that once set the world on fire. Do not let them be buried beneath the avalanche of meaningless noise. Repeat the old prayers, tell the old stories, sing the old songs, even if you are mocked, even if you are alone, because the black wind cannot erase what has been written on hearts that remember. The fourth sign is hidden even deeper. Seek the hidden gatherings. Francis foresaw that the faithful would be scattered, but not destroyed. Small pockets would form, not the grand cathedrals or the polished conferences, but humble gatherings in homes, in fields, in forgotten corners of the world, places where truth is still spoken without fear, where prayers rise like smoke in the night, where the broken and the brave find each other and whisper, "You are not alone." Seek them, find them, and when you do, protect them with your life. Because in these hidden gatherings, the seeds of the new dawn are being planted even now. And finally, the last and greatest sign: keep your heart tender. The black wind will try to make you hard. It will tell you that love is foolish, that trust is suicide, that hope is a lie. It will mock your tears. It will sneer at your compassion. It will tempt you to build walls so thick that not even the light can reach you. Do not listen. Fight for your tenderness. Guard your mercy. Protect the childlike wonder that still flickers inside you. Because a heart that still dares to love, to believe, to hope, even in the face of betrayal, abandonment, and scorn, is a heart that the black wind can never conquer. Pope Francis believed, no, he knew, that the battle for the future of the world would not be fought with armies or elections or revolutions. It would be fought in the secret places of the soul. And you are standing at the threshold of that battle now. The signs are here. The storm is here. The question is no longer whether the collapse can be stopped. It cannot. The question is whether enough hearts will remain awake to rebuild when the storm has passed. Because after the darkness, after the black wind has spent its fury, there will come a dawn, a fragile, trembling, sacred dawn. And those who endured, those who refused to forget, who clung to truth, who kept their hearts alive, they will be the ones to step into that new light. You are being called. You were always meant to be part of the remnant. The world may not know your name, history may never sing your praises, but in the hidden places where eternity weighs more than applause, your choice will echo forever. Choose now, before the last breath of the black wind sweeps over this fading world. Choose the narrow road, choose the light. Choose to remember who you were always meant to be.